Hello everybody, welcome back. Conflicts and crises force people in too many places in our world to leave their homes and to look for a safer place to live. Their voices and their stories are barely heard. In this session, we will focus on citizens living along borders and on journalists who bring their stories in the media. Kevin Smets is the participating moderator, and he will introduce the other panelists.
First, I want to check the mic is working, and then our slide set. Okay, we're all set. Hello, everyone, and what a pleasure to see so many of you, colleagues, friends, and people I've never met and hope to meet later today. This session is about borders, and I was told that journalists like data. So just to clarify and stress why it's important for us to talk about borders today and in general, but especially in the context of today's event, I have these three graphs that I think together speak very clearly about what is happening. First graph, the graph in the middle shows on a very longitudinal scale since the Second World War the number of border walls worldwide has increased exponentially, even though we are supposedly in a globalized, borderless world and so on. The graph here on the left shows the annual budget of Frontex since 2005 until recently, which has also exploded, as you see. An important side remark is that a lot of this budget increasingly is going to private companies. The border security is outsourced to private companies as well. And then, of course, the most striking and sad graph on this slide on the right are people dying on borders. And this is a topic that we will focus on in this panel as well. This is a graph about people dying on the Mexican-US border, but obviously much closer to home on the Mediterranean. Many people have died and keep on dying while trying to cross that sea border. So we believe that it's important to talk about what is happening on borders, border surveillance, border enforcement, but also to talk about the perspectives and the stories of people living in those border areas. And we will come back to that later. So the initiative for this panel comes from a project that I'm proud to lead at VUB called Real Borders. And it focuses on the relationships between border regimes and border surveillance and border imaginations and cinema, because we believe that film plays a really interesting role in thinking about borders, who belongs, who doesn't, imagining alternative worlds, developing empathy or sympathy, and so on. So film for us is a sort of arena where different ideas about the border can be negotiated. And I have to say that this is a team project. Part of the team is on the stage here with me, Irene, but it's a bigger project. And in that project, we analyze films, we talk to people living in border areas, and we also make films as part of our methodology. And we focus on three cases in that project. The Spanish-Moroccan border with its enclaves, Ceuta and Melilla, and this will also be the focus today. Then on the right side, the Irish border, Ireland, the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And in those two borders, we've already conducted in-depth research. And you see here pictures of different workshops that we did with people living in those border areas through filmmaking workshops, but we will talk about that in a minute. And then in the middle, you have the case we are about to start in a couple of months on the Syrian-Turkish border. And I will say a bit more about that at the end of the project, at the end of the panel, sorry, because this is, of course, a border that is currently undergoing huge traumatic events after the earthquakes that hit the border area in February. But today we zoom in on Ceuta and Melilla, which are two of the many deadly borders where voices of the people there are rarely heard, and where investigative journalism, documentary makers and researchers can play a role in looking critically at the current border regimes and to think about epistemologies and plurality of voices, which is of course a theme that is important for today's event. And to reflect on that with us, we have Sara Creta and Irene Gutiérrez. Sara Creta holds a PhD in journalism from Dublin City University, and she is an award-winning photojournalist and documentary filmmaker with an extensive experience in investigating human rights abuses. She has documented on the ground conditions in forced migrations, human rights violations, and crisis management. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, BBC, Al Jazeera English, RTE, NRK, ZDF, Channel 4, The Guardian, and so on. And Irene Gutiérrez is an award-winning documentary filmmaker and a PhD fellow at VUB, as well as at University Carlos III in Madrid. And as a filmmaker, she has directed Border Diaries, Hotel Nueva Isla, Connected Walls, Exile Diaries, and Between Dog and Wolf. And her films have been screened in film festivals and art venues such as the Berlinale, Rotterdam International Film Festival, MoMA Documentary Fortnight, and the Lincoln Center. And in our project, Real Borders, she focuses on vernacular cinema and participatory filmmaking. And we will talk about that work in a moment. So the format of the session is that we will first zoom in a little bit on Sara's work, then on Irene's work, and then get a conversation going about themes that connect both of their works. And the reason why we are sitting sort of awkwardly far distant from each other is that we will also show some clips, and otherwise we would be blocking the screen for you. So in larger format, you have our speakers here. So Sara, in the background we are showing some major works of Sara. And today, Sara, I think the most relevant work that you've done recently for this particular session is your work, Death on the Border, which is a 27-minute documentary for BBC Africa Eye investigating the Melilla massacre, where hundreds of refugees, mainly from Sudan, were injured and at least 23 people confirmed dead and 77 remain missing after having been crushed to death at the Moroccan-Spanish border. You have also worked on several investigative projects on Frontex air surveillance, as well as on Italian warships that are used to combat people smugglers. So your work has connected in many different ways to border issues. And I wanted to ask you to start with what you are currently working on, Sara.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Irene, for inviting me and for the audience to be with us today. One of my recent project, documentary project that I'm currently filming is again related to displacement, again related to border, but this time we are a bit far from what we consider our borders, European borders. We are at the border between Sudan and Ethiopia. This is the Grand Renaissance Dam. The picture you can see here is a massive hydroelectric project that is being built at the border between Sudan and Ethiopia. that is going to be a game changer for the region in terms of electricity production and the promise of development. And on the other side, you will see the local communities that are living a few meters away from the Grand Renaissance Dam, and they have no access to water, no access to education, no access to technology. And they hope this dam will bring them a better future, but the question is at stake: what will be their future once the dam will be finished? And this documentary travel across the Nile, so I will be traveling across the Nile and try to portray what the future look like for those communities that are living next to one of the biggest rivers in the world. Unfortunately, it's a region that is today it's again on headlines because on the 14th of April. Power struggle in Sudan has started between the general of the army and the Rapid Support Forces, that is a militia that was integrated in the government. So again, this region that seems so far from us, but it's very related to massive population displacement that could affect the Horn of Africa and the geopolitical situation.
Okay, so we will definitely keep following that work that you're currently developing to find out more about that. Can you tell us a little bit about the way in which borders have played a role in your work throughout the past years?
Yeah, so maybe we can, in a while we can show this clip, but what I wanted to introduce. Whoa! This was filmed at the border between Turkey and Bulgaria.
صوبوا 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 ضربوا ياك قوت
هذه هنا بلغارستان هذه بلغاريا ليكم بلغاريا قوسوه
انا اللي شخت بلغاريا
قوسوه خوات الشرموطه
مباشره عص عليه لا بفلوا لا تخاف لا تخاف لا تخاف شيلوا لك جيب لي قهوه شيلوا ما هيك شيل لك ما هيك دب اللي على الكتافي اللي على الكتافي شيلوا على السريع تعال يضربك تعال كتافي لك شيل لك لبوا معي بقوس يا جحش لك بقوس يا جحش لبوا قادر عالضياع يا شباب نزل قويك لك يا عبد الله لا تعال اربطوا هي اربطوا هدي حدا بده ايده هدي لك اربطوا حطوا دقيقة شوي لا عبد الله دير روحه عبد الله هدي عبد الله
Yeah, the clip is very graphic, and I'm sorry if some of the audience got disturbed, but this is the reality of today European borders. This clip was filmed by a group of Syrian refugees that was trying to cross the border between Turkey and Bulgaria. And one of them, Abdallah, was 21 years old Syrian refugee, was shot that day. And the only proof that we had of this event is this video that his friend, the people who were traveling with him filmed it. Unfortunately, today, although we have a proliferation of images and visual evidence and documents of border, and we are constantly exposed to this by media, and it's very difficult for journalists to access this area. So yeah, we talk about the freedom of press. Today, the freedom of press at the European border is a major concern for journalists. We don't have access to borders, to European borders. We don't have access to places that unfortunately are areas that are becoming black holes for journalists, for researchers. And what does this mean? This means that more and more we have to transform our work because we can't travel to this site. If we try to go there, we may be arrested, intimidated, we need tons of authorization. So we need to shift our work and start to work with this kind of visual element, visual trace, and try to reconstruct what happened, for example, that day. So this clip was filmed last December. with a group of investigative reporters at Lighthouse Report. What we did, and we can see the second clip, is to try to verify this material and to try to understand what happened based on the testimony that we collected with the Syrian refugees that we met that day at the border, but also by using satellite imagery and by trying to identify the area where Abdallah could have been shot. We also conducted a sound analysis of the video to try to understand where the bullet could have come from. And we identified that the bullet was shot by the Bulgarian side. So then when we put forward this allegation to the Bulgarian, they deny. So again, we see that how we are trying to, move ahead from, a kind of portraying the suffering of others to a more accountability-oriented form of journalism and visual storytelling. Again, we are confronted with the same question: access, power, who has the right to tell these stories, why there are no independent voices at the border able to, to document this violation, and ultimately, where is justice? Abdallah, together with a Turkish lawyer, presented a case in front of the European Court of Human Rights to ask for justice. But we know that, unfortunately, many people like him have gone through the same very experience. But we don't have any visual evidence to tell their story, although their voices, they don't matter.
Okay, thank you so much for very clearly summarizing, I think, what's at stake in the kind of work you do. And now we can perhaps go to another investigative project you did on the Melilla massacre, and you selected one section of a 24 or 27-minute documentary. It would be too long to show to you, but you can access it fully online through the BBC website. And if all works fine, it should play now. So again, I apologize, I should have said probably in the former clip as well, these are quite graphic images probably, so if you're uncomfortable with that, you have been warned. So we will play that now.
He was lying here.
وفي النهاية العسكر سيطر علينا ومسكونا، يعني بعد ما مسكونا هو كلنا ردمونا في حتة واحدة، كلنا فوق بعض يعني. بعد ذاك كانوا بيستخدموا معنا ضرب بليغ جدا، يعني حتى الضرب كان الغرض منه الضرر بالروق يعني. لتاريخ اليوم أنا عندي ما يقارب الشهر ونصف ولا شهرين إلا عندي شلل نصفي فكرة يعني حتى الآن. عندنا أخواننا، عندي 3 من الناس في نفس اللحظة كانوا يدوفوا جنبي على الحادثة.
Videos show migrants detained in the courtyard and in the area in front of the blue fence. In some of the videos, too graphic to show, we can see lifeless bodies being tossed around, people bleeding and in agony, seemingly being offered no assistance.
Okay, just a very brief clip, but can you shortly tell us a bit about this project and what it has provoked when it was released?
Again, the border between Morocco and Spain, it's a border that Irene, that I and many other photojournalists know very well. It's a border that is impossible to film. I think it's one of the few places in Europe where I was filming and my footage were deleted. This also tells a lot about the freedom of journalists in these places, right? When we started to work on this investigation, we again had a massive amount of videos that were recorded by citizens, by police, by security forces, by migrants, and we had to make sense of it. We had to verify this content and to try to understand, in a timeline of event, what has happened, who was responsible, what went wrong. And why I choose this clip, because in this clip we try to identify where the dead body were. And this is very important when we want to show, a criminal act was committed, where it was committed, and by whom it was committed, right? And this clip, especially, it was very interesting to follow the discussion we had internally, right? To choose or not to show, to show or not to show, for example, the lifeless body. Do we really need to see lifeless body to believe that that day many people died? Or is it enough to the audience to go through a verification process that we did in order to claim who is responsible? So again, here we move away from a kind of spectacularization of sufferance, but again we try to investigate who is responsible and what went wrong. And that's why I think there is more and more in my work an attempt to interrogate power. And borders are places where power materialize in a very physical way, right? Because they are building borders that are 6 meters high, like here in Melilla. But again, power is also very subtle, right? Today in the Mediterranean, we are using drones and thermal camera to spot refugees that are trying to cross. So again, we don't have a physical border, but we can perceive how power is definitely created, right? And how our policies are created using this power. That is ultimately the power of cameras and thermal cameras and drone cameras that are spotting refugees to send them back to Libya.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And I think that's a nice bridge to Irene's work, where also power and giving voice, visibility, these have been themes in your work as well, Irene. So we will go to, so here in the background you see some of the previous works that Irene has done that I mentioned before when introducing her. But perhaps we can immediately jump to what you're currently working on, Irene. Here, even more previous work, very highly recommended. And this will be the clip, right? Already. So let's not start it yet. Irene, what are you currently working on? I mentioned that you work in this project on film and borders, and we make films. What exactly did you do in Ceuta and Melilla, where this Sara's work was also focusing on?
Yes, as Sara mentioned before, this border is quite problematic because there was a shift not too far away in time in where the images are taken by the border forces and not by citizens. So I'm actually blacklisted in that border because I was doing a web documentary with my colleague Youssef. Connected Walls is free online, and as Sara mentioned, my footage was removed from the camera, otherwise I will have problems with the police. So after this, I came to the Real Borders projects with the challenge of making participatory films among borderlanders, people who inhabit borders in Ceuta, which is my city. So for me it was a challenge to tell the stories of the border dwellers, but also not exposing them to the danger of going like besides the wall and try to figure out, frame the wall itself. And also, as Sara mentioned, it's a matter of performing or framing subtle processes of bordering, which are not placed at the border itself, but are taking place in the daily life in terms of legal exclusion, bureaucracy, non-belonging, politics of non-belonging. So with these women in Ceuta, what we made as an introduction of the films.
Perhaps we can talk about later. The participants later, but before we continue, I wanted to ask you about your positionality, like you are at this crossroads between artistic work and academic work. Can you say a few words about that?
Yes, another game changer in my life was to realize that we as filmmakers can be banned even if we are making films in our burn place, a place of burn. So I was shooting in my city, and then I realized that I didn't have the access to to frame my own city. So with this project and this shifting, I was realizing that even myself, trying to kind of amplify voices of people on the move and border dwellers, I was also playing the role of playing kind of power in terms of pointing at them, and again reproducing the canon of victimization or othering. So with this participatory filmmaking methodology, we were trying to go far away from these narratives that are mainstream spread, and try to create alternatives, imaginaries of people on the move or border dwellers that are talking about belonging and becoming more than people, vulnerable people. They are not vulnerable people, they are people in a vulnerable situation because of the border politics. There is a clear reason for that.
So we will watch one clip now, and it was quite hard to choose this clip because this is part of an impressive collection of 26 videos that are currently being wrapped up on this work that we did in Ceuta. But we brought for you one clip. Do you want to introduce it, or we just jump into it and then discuss it?
This is Freedom, and the other is Daughter. Did you choose?
Daughter is
yes.
more illustrative, I think. Yeah. So that's the one you don't get, but at a later occasion.
Me llamo Khadija y soy de Marruecos. Llevo 17 años trabajando en Ceuta. Tengo una hija en Marruecos. Ella tiene 20 años. Antes de la pandemia viajaba a Marruecos todos los fines de semana. También los días de fiesta o en las vacaciones. Siempre me iba con mi hija a mi pueblo, que es muy bonito. Allí me gustaba comer higos y chombos en verano. En invierno me gustaba porque todo se ponía verde y cubierto de flores de colores. En la primavera, cuando llegaba al pueblo, me sentaba debajo de la higuera y me quedaba allí viendo las flores del campo. Cuando iba a mi pueblo, siempre estaba con mi hija. No nos separábamos nunca. Disfrutábamos juntas los días de fiesta. Celebrábamos juntas su cumpleaños. Íbamos juntas a las bodas de la familia. Viajábamos juntas. Cuando mi hija terminaba el curso escolar, yo siempre la acompañaba para coger el diploma. Su profesor me daba el diploma para que yo misma se lo entregara. Y mi hija se ponía muy contenta. Cuando cerraron la frontera por la pandemia, todo cambió. Yo me quedo aquí y mi hija se quedó en Marruecos sola. Ya no la puedo ver más. Si regreso a Marruecos, no me dejarán volver a entrar a Ceuta. Ella en estos 3 años ha hecho todo sola. Ha disfrutado de los días de fiesta sola. Ha viajado sola. Lleva 3 años celebrando su cumpleaños sola. Ha recogido los diplomas de la escuela sola. Ha recibido los diplomas de repostería sola. El diploma del carnet de conducir sola. El diploma de curso de peluquería sola. Cuando me manda las fotos de ella sola por WhatsApp, me pongo muy triste. Muchas veces lloro. Quisiera estar con mi hija, poder acompañarla en estos momentos, sin tener que renunciar a mi trabajo aquí. Mi hija necesita comer, vestirse, estudiar. Hija mía, espero pronto poder reunirme contigo.
All right, so there are 25 more of such videos, some in totally different genres or using archival materials, so they're all quite different from each other. Irene, can you tell us a little bit more about the participants? Of course, this is the background. Who were the participants? What is participatory filmmaking, and how did that process go, in particular for the clip that you showed here?
Well, participatory filmmaking is a creative, participatory, arts-based method, in where we think about the moving image as a as a tool for research. In this case, we are applying this methodology within the borderlands, border areas, and among the borderlanders in order to challenge border epistemologies from below, in order to challenge epistemologies of people on the move from below. And in this case, this is Dina's film, and she's one of the 800 cross-border workers in Ceuta, trapped in Ceuta. They cannot go to Morocco, their country of origin, because if they enter to Morocco after the border regulations provoked by COVID, they cannot re-enter to Ceuta because they don't have a work permission of residence of permission. So in the end, they have been living in Ceuta for one of the participants for 40 years, working as housemaids, living and live-out maids. But in the end, after decades of hard work, they are not recognized as citizens, European citizens, because the cross-border legal figure is based on extractivism, border extractivism. And for us, within the Real Borders project, we didn't want to apply destructivism in terms of applying a method. So the idea was to talk with them the way they wanted to be portrayed, and to use their own images, and also to wonder how imaginaries could be like more convenient to do advocacy, and to use this workshop for the politicians to know that you cannot have people trapped in a 19 square meters city for 3 years. That is the problem of these 800 people now in Ceuta. So they cannot meet their families, and even they cannot update their passports who were expired during the COVID. That's the problematic of these women.
One theme, and now I want to bring your two stories together. One theme that returns quite often is this tension that arises when wanting to amplify voices, as you mentioned, and trying to do that through a visual medium like documentary or film. So on the one hand, as you already hinted at, you risk making those that you are portraying vulnerable, or exposing them, or even making it dangerous for them when they are not anonymous anymore, or making them spectacular, as you also mentioned. So is that a tension you are very aware of when doing this kind of work, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think when we talk about these places also, we need to recognize the division of citizenship that exists in these spaces. Like citizens that have the right to exist as citizens, and citizens that are not wanted, that are illegal, that are black, that are life that don't matter, right? Life that have no right to speak. For example, when we when we look at the images of refugees arriving to Italy, no one journalist was able to interview those survivors, right? Imagine if that was a boat full of European, immediately the European media would run to interview the survivor there. So again, these voices have no right to exist as voices per se, but they are always voices that are victim of, right, this border regime. But again, I think in the work that I try to do, and also I'm sure Irene would agree, we try to investigate in a catastrophe that is a human-made catastrophe. And that's why we interrogate the responsibility. And ultimately, I think what is important is to use this medium, filmmaking, journalism, investigative reporting, as a way also of creating a kind of future of the border, right? In terms of, we would like borders with justice. We would like border that would respect the right of people fleeing persecution. So we try to create a kind of imaginary place where right of refugees will be respected. So it's a kind of visual imagination that we try to build on. And I do believe that this work is important because it's also changed the way that we narrate what is going on at European borders. And more by distancing filmmaker, artist, researcher, and journalists from these places, also our image, they become distant, right? So we are not able to have close-up, or we are not able to tell stories in a very personal or intimate way, but we have to use drone footages or distant, camera lens that would not allow us to go closer, right? So this has also, I think, created a kind of dynamic within the spectacular and spectacularization of border and what is going on, because the audience is distant, right? And I think that's something that is changing more and more with social media and with the use of platforms like Instagram or today a lot of Sudanese are fleeing and they are sharing their stories on Instagram, and this is not new, right? A lot of Afghans were traveling across the Balkans and they were filming their journey. And again, I think this digital trace allow us to tell a different story that ultimately want to inquire on the right to be citizen.
Thank you for that, really stimulating answer, and I'm sure that, Irene, that echoes really well with your own experience. Do you want to add on that?
No, the only thing that I would like to add is within this methodology, we're trying to make it visible, but also with avoiding exposure, and sometimes it's a challenge in terms of ways of portraying and filmmaking techniques. So in this case, we use a video essay or film essay film, in order to prioritize the voiceover. And also, we have 3 levels of exposure. One is a portrait, full, and other 2 are faceless films. And another one is with blur faces or more faces, pictures that they have made themselves. So I think there are levels of exposure. And I think it's for us also as filmmakers refreshing what is the canon of filmmaking, what is the canon of representation, what is the canon of a documentary, and we learn from each other how to destabilize this canon, and also with the idea of using webdoc as a tool of dissemination is also to give access to people who are not used to be in a film festival or this kind of elitist circuits, and directly from the internet have all the films in one play. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. We had prepared like 5 more questions for this discussion, but time is short and there's lots to say. But I do think we have time for, I see a thumb up. We do have time for 1 or perhaps 2 questions from the audience. I do want to stress that please keep your keep your question brief, to the point. If it's more like a comment and a reflection, I would encourage you to keep it for the reception afterwards. We have time to mingle afterwards as well. So there are 2 mics that can circulate. I already saw a hand in that corner.
Thank you. My question is for both of you, because your stories and your interaction with different communities and people facing real life-threatening challenges. My question is around how do you build that trust and that connection with them so that when you come on platforms like today, they feel like the essence of who they are and the values and the lives and the lived experience that they've had is being translated through film in a way that will speak to politicians and policymakers or people who can make a difference to them and other people facing similar challenges. So how do you build those connections and build that trust as filmmakers? Thank you.
Sara, do you want to go first? I suggest you go first then.
It's really like it depends from place to place, and we cannot really generalize. Every project is different, and every country is different. Every community is different. But when you try to build trust, I think the most important thing is to be on the same level. In a kind of way. I think today what we try to show here is that the power of image and who has the power to control his image, right? So, most of the time when you would film in places, you would not even ask for the consent, and you would assume that people want to be filmed, right? Because anyway, they have no rights, they are illegal, they are, crossing the border illegal, so we can film them, right? But again, I think the process of building trust also include the process of asking consent, and I think this is a key, because at the end of the day, consent is not just I will sign a form and I will agree that you can use my footage, but things may change, right? So in maybe 1 year time, I would change idea, and I don't want to be seen again. So I think what is important here, what I was saying, to be on the same level. Like, would you like, for example, to be filmed in a way that you don't like to be portrayed, right? I would not like it. I would not like people to film my house if I didn't invite them in, right? So in my practice of filmmaking, I'm always very conscious on, the right to say no, the right to, also for community that are not used to say no, because it's culturally not accepted, to say no, but to offer that space, where we try to build a relation that is beyond filmmaking, or and I think that's very important, because that gives the trust to the person to say no, I don't want to be filmed, or I want to be filmed this way, or I want to be filmed in 3 days, or and that's, I think, is very important. So is time, is space, but also what I was trying to tell through the work we did is the question of justice. So we do a lot of work with lawyers and with activists that are constantly try to document these crimes, and the work that we do with journalists and lawyer can do together is really important, because it can affect change on the long run, right? So we do a lot of work together with lawyers, and this is very important. For example, when you want to prove intentionality, or when you want to prove that there was a criminal act committed, and you want to bring this proof and evidences to, I don't know, the International Criminal Court, or to the European Court of Human Rights. So it's also important to, again, to remember that what is happening at the European border is a violation of our European value, our European law, international law. So we need also to use legal mechanism to challenge this, and visual evidences, filmmaking, research can be part of this.
Thank you, Sarah. Irene, do you want to add maybe specifically to the advocacy element of the question? In the case of Ceuta, for instance, how did advocacy convince participants to be part of your filmmaking workshop?
Yeah, normally for participatory filmmaking, you make films among others, and you make films together, and you decide the aesthetics, the technology, the topics. But in this case, they were completely aware of they wanted to use this workshop for them to make it visible, the situation. So they decide, for instance, the way they wanted to be portrayed, the archives they're going to gather as this one, or even if there is another archive, the images they want to play with. And in terms of dissemination, also they brought the idea of doing a local, national, and international dissemination of the web doc with policymakers, specifically for them to know what is happening with these 800 people. So I think that everything was negotiated from the beginning, and with the consent was played at the beginning and the midpoint and in the end, because as Sara mentioned, you can change your mind in the middle of the process. You can decide not to put your name on the final credits, and we always talk about that every day, and we have a very kind of active WhatsApp group where we share not only images and sounds, but also opinions and decisions. And that's part of the trust process, trying to build process and trust, and also time, as Sara mentioned, is a game changer to spend time with them. And also we have a background, so they as soon as they watch what we have done, they can imagine that we are not going to play the other side, so we are going to work together. And to respect their goals, which for us is the most important. It's not them making things for our research project and creating knowledge, it's just also for them what they're going to gain with this workshop and with this experience of filmmaking themselves.
Thank you, Irene. I'm getting subtle signs from the lightning that it's almost the end of our session. So we will keep it at that one question. It was a great question and rich answers. So if you have further questions, we will stay around. So don't hesitate to come to us and ask us more about this work we're doing. To wrap up, there's one more slide, and here I come back to what I mentioned in the beginning, that we have a project that is in the coming months also going to the Turkish-Syrian border with the same kind of filmmaking workshop. So hopefully in a year from now, we will be able to show you also the results from that. And I feel a little bit awkward about this, but at the same time, we feel strongly about highlighting what is happening in the Turkish-Syrian border area, where in February there was a huge earthquake, touching also our partners there. So we are constantly in touch with partners, especially at the university in Adana, and they are setting up support actions for students who have been hit by the earthquake or their families. So what we decided to do with our project this year is wherever we go, wherever we show our work and the films, we take our donations box, which is in the good hands of Sylvia. So Sylvia will be right by the door, and if you want to donate something, we will make sure that it arrives in the hands of our colleagues at the University of Adana to support students there. We included also here the addresses to the social media as well as our websites if you want to check out the other work or want to know more. And then I hope you join me in thanking our speakers, Sara Creta and Irene Gutiérrez, for sharing about your work and for your stimulating thoughts about participatory filmmaking, about working in border areas, and especially the importance of film and visual evidence in that context. So thank you very much for being with us, And please don't go away, because right after this there will be another panel to close the day. Thank you so much.